Okay, so at this point, I'm going to introduce my main tactic, which is the head size ratio. This is common in a lot of different art mediums, but especially in comics. For instance, the Marvel Method books teach this, and anime tends to follow it as well as Western comics. Basically, the rule is to determine a character's size based off their age, you can take their head and make them a certain number of heads. So in this case, the proportions is a free head body. So basically, there's the head, and then if you stack two more heads on top of each other, you would get the character's height. To do this in Vroid, I decrease the height to the minimum and slightly increase the body size to create a more rounded shape, because toddlers generally are fairly round. Technically, this character is a little bit older than a toddler. It would most likely be closer to kindergarten, but similar idea. Then I increase the head size and increase the head width by more. Again, going for a rounded shape. And I increase the neck width to support the head, because this isn't a chibi. You generally want the neck to be somewhat proportional. For the youngest age, I also decrease the shoulder width so that the pear shape would be de-emphasized. Vroid by default has a very noticeable pear shape, and you don't really want that with younger ages. And I, of course, decrease the chest size to 0. For the face, I increased the eye size X and eye size Y, increasing the Y more than the X. I actually went outside the base parameters for size Y, because you want, for the youngest ages, a skewed ratio where the Y is greater, because it creates a more innocent type look in anime style. You'll notice this if you look at children in most anime. For instance, Anya Forger from Spy X Family has this ratio. Then the last thing I did is I made the cheeks slightly sunken and the chin rounded to create that roundness and decrease the chin length. Basically, you're just going for roundness and as few angles as you can get at this age. At this point with the elementary schooler, the ratio of head size is about 4 to 5. Closer to 4 in this case. If you go closer to 5, you'll end up making the character look older. So for proportionality, I again decreased the height, slightly increased body size, slightly increased head size. I did not increase head width, because at this point, the shape of the face has a ratio closer to what's accurate, and then again decrease chest size. At this point, I left the shoulders where they are, but you might want to decrease the shoulder width and the waist width depending on the clothes, because loose clothes can hide the shape, but if you have tighter fitting clothes, you want to change that. Then again, increase eye size X and eye size Y, with Y being greater than X, and round the face slightly. At this point, the rounding of the face is relatively slight, and the jawline shift is also slight because the face shape is starting to get more developed. You don't want to have a completely round face because that creates that toddler look. But if you're going for an elementary schooler, you still want some of that roundness because most still have the childish sort of proportions. The biggest shifts when moving from elementary to middle school are, again, you're adjusting the heads ratio. In this case, I went with a 5-head ratio, which is still underneath the adult 6 to 7, but it's far closer than the toddler's 3 or the child's 4. To do that, it was again decrease the height slightly, and then I also decreased the chest size, but I didn't completely remove it because you might not always want to. In this case, I was going for a 10 to 13-year-old. You would adjust the ratios depending on that. And I left the head width just slightly above what the base was. The adjustment's very slight, and you might be able to ignore it. Then for eye size, I slightly increased it. It's a smaller increase than for the elementary schooler, but it's still present, and eye size Y is still greater than eye size X. Down at the facial modifications, I again slightly rounded the chin, but by this point, I'm not adjusting any other features, because the base Vroid is relatively close to this age range. This younger high school age is pretty close to Vroid's default. In fact, you can probably get away with not modifying anything at all. However, I do make some small modifications. For one thing, I very, very slightly decrease the height so that the body ratio is slightly more compressed. I don't modify any other body variables, but you can decrease the chest size if you want to. That's, again, by this point, most girls have finished puberty, so yeah, I generally recommend realistic proportions because, again, you're making a child character. Please do not sexualize them. And then on the face, I slightly increase eye size X, but I don't increase eye size Y because by default, Vroid has a fairly large one, and by the later teen years, anime tends to have the wider eyes rather than the taller eyes. And then on the face shape, I did slightly modify one of the variables, but it really wasn't by much. Like, you might round slightly to get a younger, but really this is Vroid's default age. I am going to do one more here, which is a older high schooler, young adult. And you'll notice that it does emphasize why Vroid focuses on the younger high school with their default model. This model is probably the oldest you can get without using textures and going far outside of the slider values. Most people would say it looks like a older high schooler or maybe a young adult. And you can play that up by using various makeup. Makeup tends to make female characters look a little older, especially when you emphasize the cheeks and the lips a bit more. Specifically, angled cheeks will emphasize, whereas the more traditional, like on the cheek, can make someone look younger. But to get this age, I did not really modify body proportions at all. I slightly upped the height to change the ratio, but it doesn't really do much. And I also slightly decreased the head size so that I got closer to that 7 to 8 ratio rather than the 6 or so. Then with the face, I decreased eye size Y to the lowest it could go on the slider. And I decreased size X by a little bit less. Basically, by this age, the ratio should be that the eyes are narrower, especially if you're going on the older end into early 20s. Then I also slightly straightened the upper eyelid and turned on the scornful look. Basically, this makes it so that the character looks somewhat more tired without... it can look just older if you correctly change the eyeliner, but by default it does tend to make the character look a little more tired. But it's the main way you can get the ratio correct. Then down at the proportions, I increased the jawline position. Basically, if you move the jawline down, it makes the character look a bit older. And if you increase the chin length slightly, it also does that. Wider chin width paired with those is another way to get older, and the jaw angle should be increased so that you preserve the angularity of older characters. Some people also will go in and turn off some of the feminine outlines, because as you can see, it shifts the features down. But if you're going for cuter, you generally don't do that. So you can play that based off your case. This is the oldest age I'm going to end this video. I have put my video on getting ages from high school or young adult to older characters in the description of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped you figure out how to age your characters for your Vroid comics, anime, etc.